Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Bower.
And I'm Joey Marino. Welcome to Actor Chats.
This week we have our first part with Troy Evans.
You probably know Troy from Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and over 100 episodes of ER.
So for this first segment, Troy talks about wanting to be the first president from Montana, doing theater, deciding to be an actor, and his first time on a set. So just as a note to our listeners, during the recording, there were two technical issues. Troy's dog would sometimes bang the table, so you might hear a loud bang every once in a while. And also, some of us hit the table when we were emphasizing words, and so there might be a little spike, but I've tried to normalize it for you for your listening pleasure.
We won't do that no more. So here is Actor Chats with Troy Evans. And this is our maiden voyage, and it couldn't be any better than being with a good friend of mine, the beautiful, the talented Troy Evans.
When we talk about superheroes, we talk about their origin and how they got their powers. So we kind of do it with as an actor. What do you think the moment was that was your origin story where you thought, this is what I want to do?
Well, I have a very specific answer to that, and you're probably not going to get it from anybody else. I grew up in a political family in Montana, and I'm a strong liberal now, but I was a conservative from a conservative Republican family. When I was about 9 or 10, Don Nutter, who was the governor of Montana, and he was being talked about as presidential timber, and he was killed in a plane crash. But I had that idea in my head that a Montanan can be president. So that was my goal. It was very clear, and everybody knew it. And if you go back, if you look at my high school annual, the people who signed all said, please remember me when you're president. Because there was another role model. Do you remember a guy named Mike Mansfield? You're a little young for that, but he was a Republican senator from Montana.
Okay.
But he was very long-serving. He was the majority leader of the United States Senate and very widely respected. And when he retired, he became our ambassador to Japan for about 30 years. And so I had those two Montana figures in my mind. And I had it mapped out. When I got out of high school in Kalispell, I was going to go to Montana State University. I was going to become a lawyer. I was going to get out. I was going to run for the state legislature. After the legislature, I was going to be the governor of Montana. And after I was governor, I was going to be the senator from Montana. And then I was going to be the first president from a western state. That was my plan. So come 1966, I'm going to school in Montana. Now, we had no money, and I had a rock and roll band called Gangrene. A video I can show you. I've got posters up right
Now
here.
there's posters on the wall. Excellent.
Posters on the wall.
And I was paying my way through college playing in this band. We'd play weekend concerts, and in those days you could do that. You didn't have to have $200,000 to go to college in those days. But I was also doing a lot of partying. And that was, the era of the Vietnam War. And if your GPA dropped below a 2-point, you got what in those days we called the McNamara Scholarship to Southeast Asia. Now, you would think that would be enough encouragement to get a guy who's actually I'm not a genius, but I'm not bone stupid, that I could have managed like a 2.1 or something if I'd actually gone to class occasionally, but I didn't, and so I was drafted. And when I came home from Vietnam, I was quite a different person, and I really wasn't interested in going back to school. Wasn't in law school yet, but. And I had saved a bunch of money, you're paid pretty well when you're in combat, but you don't spend any money. So I had about $10,000, and I took that money and used it to open a rock and roll bar.
Oh my goodness!
Which it turns out is a really bad idea for an alcoholic.
Oh.
and I spent almost 3, and it was a huge success. It was the only rock and roll bar for a 100-mile radius, and people still talk about it. When I go to Montana, people say, "When are you going to reopen the powder keg?" Well, I was not only an alcoholic, I was a violent alcoholic. I really don't know how many, but I had at least 20 assault convictions, mostly from. I'll tell you a quick story of the way I managed the bar. One night, it's a Friday night. Of course, Friday and Saturday are big money nights, and there was a special table up in this kind of raised area, big round table, and that was the catbird seat in the bar, where if you're up there, you could see the dance floor and the band and the bar, and there was an extended family up there of brother-in-laws and sister-in-laws, and they're having some kind of family argument and breaking glasses and stuff. And I went up there, I took a pitcher of beer up and gave him a pitcher of beer and said, "Listen, it's a nice friendly place. Whatever you're arguing about can't be that important. Why don't we let that go and just have fun?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, we're so sorry. Yeah, okay." And so I left him the beer, and I walked back down behind the bar. And by the time I got back behind the bar, they were at it again, screaming, motherfucking each other, and I hear the glass breaking, and I didn't feel like walking back up there again. So I looked, and I had a sort of collection of toys under the cash register, a tire iron and a sawed-off pool cue and a roll of nickels, a Ruger automatic I had. So I just pulled that out and emptied it up in their general direction. Didn't hit anybody, but put several in the ceiling and several in the wall around them.
Had you had a few at the time?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I started, started in the, in those days, I didn't consider beer drinking.
Oh.
It was only the bourbon that was, and so all this culminated in and I was very harsh when people started fights and stuff in a bar. I would just stomp the crap out of them and throw them out in the street.
Wow.
So a guy made a rude pass at another guy's wife, and then it got violent, and I didn't like this guy, and I beat him up really bad. I broke both his legs, and skull fracture, brain concussion,
Oh my gosh.
Dislocated shoulder, 2 broken legs, and then threw him out in the street. And turned out that he was an attorney. So when you do that to an attorney, then you're not going over anymore paying the $75 fine and saying to the justice of the peace, "Oh, I'm sorry, Orville." They were trying to give me 40 years.
Oh my God.
And for aggravated assault, which is essentially attempted murder. And plan I came up with to try to get out of it was to go down to the Veterans Hospital in Sheridan, Wyoming. They had a 90-day alcohol program, and my theory was in 90 days, first of all, it will show the judge that I'm trying to be a better person.
Right.
It will show him we don't have to go in and say Troy's a veteran. Obviously, if you're in a Veterans Hospital, you're a veteran. And I thought maybe in 90 days they'll take the casts off, so they're not bringing the main witness in on a gurney.
Oh no.
And when I took this idea to my attorney said, "Well, are you an alcoholic?" And I said, no, but that's the beauty of it. See, is since I drink like a fifth and a half a day, I think I can make them think I am.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
there's the clear
Yeah.
thinking. So I went down there and then came back, and we had a plea agreement that I was going to get 6 years suspended. But the judge was a senile guy who was like 86 years old named W.W. Leslie, who had been a political nemesis of my grandfather was his political nemesis. My grandfather had beaten him for office several times in Butte. And so when I came up and entered my plea, and that I'd agreed, I'd had a meeting like minutes before with the prosecutor, and I was going to get this suspended sentence, and but he gave me 40 years.
Oh my goodness.
And so then, and even prosecuting attorney was trying to explain, no, Your Honor, this is, and he was saying, this is a bad boy, he used a gun, and they're saying, no, there is no gun in this, Your Honor. He says, well, I don't, and they're protesting. He says, well, all right, what was he supposed to get? He said, well, 6 years suspended. He said, oh, well, all right, bring him back. But then instead of like resentencing me, he just added 6 more years on, and so now I had 46 with 6 suspended. Well, so I went to Montana State Prison for about 2 years, and then during that time there was a sentencing review and a bunch of, and so eventually they cut that sentence back down, and I got out serving the 2 years. To the question that you asked me earlier, when you're drunk and really drunk over a period of time, you don't sober up in a day or even a weekend or a week or a month. It's foggy up there. And about 6 months later, I'm sitting in my little cubiculo at Montana State Prison in Deer Lodge, known as Rancho Deluxe, and suddenly I had this epiphany. This little light went on in my head, and I went, oh man, I bet I'm not going to be governor now.
Yeah.
So then you start thinking, now what can I do? Well, I can't own a bar anymore. Felon can't have a liquor license. Right. I can't be a teacher. Can't be a cop. Can't be an accountant. Can't go back in the military. Can't be a lawyer. There's a whole, really,
wing of professions you can't touch.
Yeah,
right?
and it's wide.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? And then a few days later, I thought, I'll bet nobody ever asks an actor if he has a felony conviction. And that day I said, in prison you send messages, they're called kites. And I sent a kite to the warden requesting a copy of Hamlet.
Oh my goodness.
And I have that. I still have that down at the house. With the stamp in the front. Permission to have in his cell, Hamlet. Signed Warden Blodgett.
That's incredible.
So then I, after the 2 years I got out, and I went down to Montana State University and got in their acting program. And then at the end of that year, came down to California on spring break to see an old girlfriend who was at Berkeley. And there was a guy named Donovan Marley who had founded a theater up in Santa Maria and Solvang called Pacific Conservatory of Performing Arts. That at that time, unbeknownst to me, was very highly regarded. At that time, it's the place where all the actors from the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco went to work in the summer. And so, but I crashed his audition in Berkeley because I wanted to audition for the Lost Creek Opera House for their summer melodramas. Their
Did
Western
you have any
melodramas.
craft at that moment? Were you just totally new?
Well, I'd been acting at the University of Montana State University for about 9 months, in which period of time I had become the greatest living actor in the English-speaking world, And I remember this guy. I was totally ignorant at the time, and the guy Donovan Marley was, unbeknownst to me, was very influential in the theater world in California. And I went in, and I remember I did Hotspur, the Hotspur from Henry IV Part 1. And I could just imagine what it must have sounded like, because I was very regional in those days. I'm pretty regional now, but it was like, my liege, I did deny no prisoners, but I remember when the fight was done, and I was,
Yeah.
And he's just sitting there looking at it. He's a big old Texas guy, and one of those guys who always gets his way. He created this theater out of whole cloth at a little community college in Santa Maria. He said, well, it's kind of interesting. He said, what's your song? I said, I don't sing. He said, it doesn't have to be a prepared song. It could just be a little happy birthday or anything, just so I can get an idea of your pitch. I said, maybe you didn't hear me, pal.
Oh, no.
I said I don't sing.
Oh, no.
Because You're
still a tough guy at this point.
I had no intention of demeaning myself by going to a junior college in California when I was at MSU in Montana as one of their leading actors. And I wasn't going to take any guff from this guy. But I got back to Montana and he sent me a contract. But I knew one guy who was teaching in Salinas at Hartnell College. So I called him and said, you know anything about this Donovan Marley? And he said, if you got an offer from Donovan Marley, you better go. And so I went and did that summer, and then I had my car packed and was ready to drive back to Montana to go back to school and stop to check to see if I'd had any mail that came in. And he said, oh, yeah, I've been meaning to talk to you. Do you want to stay and be like an artist in residence during the school year? And so I ended up being there 3 or 4 years and then started, making little forays down into L.A. trying to get film or TV work. And met my wife, Heather, there and, tons of... In fact, there are a lot of bad Hollywood stories. You want to hear a really good
Yes.
Yeah.
A good Hollywood
ones are good, yeah.
story.
One of the productions, do you know who Danny Davis is? Danny Davis was the butler on The Nanny.
Okay.
And Danny Davis is a great classical actor. Probably one of the top 10 in the United States. And an old school grand opera diva. So we were doing the Scottish play in Santa Maria. And it was our first tech rehearsal, and at this theater, this is why Heather was there, everything it was one of those theaters with massive production values, so we all had the cast of Macbeth was about 80, and we all had real swords and real shields and real helmet. So this is the first tech rehearsal. We just got all that stuff, and I had a metal sword that was shield that was as tall as I was. So those guys, and actually in that day, that guy would have had a serf to carry his shield for him, And it's a tech rehearsal, and it's like the end of July, and it's 100 degrees, and we're in this theater and Danny pitches this fit and starts berating these spear carriers. And I was kind of the senior guy among the people who don't really matter in the production.
You'd done a number of shows at
Yes,
this point.
yes, but I wasn't, this was in the summer, they'd get the equity guest artists. It was all like, he'd done Hamlet, very, highly regarded, professional actor. So they had those guys, a cadre of about 15 artists in residence. Then they had a group of guys like me, who I called the others, and then they had a lot of students. So I wrote a little speech in my head, which was basically, Danny, we love you. Everybody's doing their best. Please understand, we just got this stuff. It's not going to be this noisy. We're just learning how to carry it and move with it, and everybody's trying. Please have a little patience. And I stepped out from behind the curtain, and the way the speech came out was, you motherfucker, you have the balls to talk to us like that when we have fucking swords? What the fuck is wrong? And I chased him out of the theater.
Oh, no.
Yeah, which I was shocked that I wasn't fired for that, because it's like, obviously somebody has to go, and who's it going to be? Macbeth or Old Sewer?
Right.
But, that all worked out. So that was at least 30 years ago. 2 weeks ago, Heather was off blacksmithing. So I went off by myself to South Pasadena to have breakfast, and a guy came over and introduced himself and said that he'd remembered this all these years, that he was the spear carrier who was getting screamed at by Danny Davis. And he said, it just means, so much to me after all these years that you stood up for me. And I said, well, thank you. So we sat and we had a little chat and stuff, and he went on his way. This is on Sunday. On Wednesday, I get a call from my agents that they'd had a call from Sullivan and Sons that I was being offered a guest starring role on Sullivan and Son, because it turns out F.J. Pratt is an executive producer on that show.
Oh, my goodness.
So there's a little karma
That's-
coming around. A 30-year arc.
Audition 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
He didn't know it.
That's amazing.
Isn't that wonderful?
But it seems like your life is full of those things. I mean,
Yeah.
I know. How long have we known each other?
Well,
Like-
close to 20 years. Probably
Yeah.
20 years.
We worked on ER together. How did you first get started in television, though? Did you find that was a big switch from the stage?
Yeah, very, very hard. And what I started doing, because when I'd been at Santa Maria, and I can't really remember how those years went. That's a long time ago now. But and it got to where sometimes I was in shows and sometimes I wasn't in shows. But also he hired great directors from all the regional theaters all over the country. So I started getting other jobs in the Arizona Theater Company and the Berkeley Rep and South Coast Rep, Costa Mesa. So I started, working. But whenever I wasn't in a play, either in Santa Maria or one of these other places, then I'd come here and try to get started. And it took me 3 years to get an agent, and it took another year to get my first day's work, which was on Soap. Billy
Soap,
Crystal's
yeah.
show.
Yeah, Billy
And
Crystal.
I remember I was, as the expression goes, I was strictly from hunger. I was so broke and so green, and I was the bailiff. I had to say all rise, one two word part. And I went over to Paramount and I got on that set in the morning, and I was so hungry, and I'm looking at that craft service, and I stood around there for a couple of hours, and finally I went over to the guy and said, how much are the donuts? And he just looked at me like I was the biggest asshole. He said, they're free. I was like, oh my God, free donuts?
Another reason to be an actor.
Yeah. I thought, I'm never leaving. I'm never leaving.
So that was our first part with Troy Evans.
No, I want a donut.
Me too. Be sure to tune in next time with Troy Evans when he talks about his first LA agent, appearing as a guest star on LA Law, as well as the difference between acting for film and theater.
This has been Actor Chats with Troy Evans.